When we start talking about humility, one of the things that's certainly going to come up in our thoughts, and at least possibly also in our conversations as well, is what about our emotions? What about how we feel? What about anger? What about resentment? What about happiness? What about all these things, these parts of us that God has given to us, these things about us that help us interact with the world, help us feel what is happening? How do we deal with those? And in mind, if we focus too much on our emotions instead of the underlying reality, instead of the underlying truth that's happening in our life, not how we particularly feel in a moment, but if we focus too much on our emotions, we will become volatile. And let me give you an example. If you were to step off of a dock into a canoe, and I did this at the age of about 14 for the first time, off of a dock into a canoe, do you know what's going to happen? That canoe is going to tip. And if you try to stop the canoe from tipping by jumping back and forth from side to side as the canoe tips back and forth, then you will end up much like my brother and I did, completely soaked head to toe, and the canoe turned over. Now, I've been in a canoe many more times since then, and I've never flipped another canoe because I have learned that when you get in a canoe, the best thing you can do is very quickly get very still. Very quickly allow yourself to settle, because jumping side to side while a canoe is moving is all it's going to do is tip it over. If our emotions are on this level here, and we spend all of our time jumping back and forth, trying to regulate our emotions and calling that humility, then what we're going to do is tip the canoe. We're going to fall out. So how do we get still? That's probably the biggest question. How do we get still? How do we get quiet? How do we reset ourselves, if you will? How do we calm down when someone is telling us to calm down? Doesn't work, by the way, usually. Well, Paul talks about it in the passage that we looked at last time in Colossians chapter 3. He says, don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon, or celebrating a Sabbath day. He said they are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. And then this next one, do not let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you. Now, I mean, what a tremendous collection of phrases there to try to understand. But what Paul is simply saying is this: your relationship is with Christ. Find that, trust that, lean into that. Let that be the stillness that envelops you, because you're going to step into some canoes and they are going to rock, and you may even end up tipped out of the canoe because your emotions may get to that point. But true humility is found in trusting in Christ and learning God's reality, not our reality. So many of us say things about ourselves that we wouldn't allow ourselves to say about others. Why is it that we find more pleasure in being harmful to ourselves than we would to others? And it's because we're not finding our reality in Christ. We're finding our reality in our emotions and how we feel. And so we say hurtful and derogatory and demeaning things about ourselves in a way to make us feel better. We're jumping to the other side of the canoe, and all that's going to do is cause the canoe to flip over. That's just it. So humility has to be found in what Christ says about us and who Jesus says we are. So how do we do that? Well, we fertilize, we base our lives based on who He is and what He says about us. He loves us. He's a good Father. He desires good things for us. And then we allow ourselves to become rooted in those things. And we let God decide our ability instead of us deciding our ability. And so some of those thoughts that I have for you today were found in chapter 6 here of Humble Roots by Hannah Anderson. And she talks about an herb garden and that she was attempting to plant, and how she spent all the time, all the preparation, and planted all the herbs, and 24 hours later most of them were dead because the fertilizer that she used had been sour. And if our lives are saturated with sourness, and bitterness, and anger, then we're going to really struggle with our emotions, especially when it comes to the work of humility. God bless you.